All right, so we'll get right into the next video immediately in the series of Active Directory for OSCP. So last time we left off, we have established that we're dealing with the domain controller, and from the Nmap scan the last time, we saw something very peculiar. We saw they were actually running a web server on the domain controller, which is definitely bad practice, right? We also saw that, as expected, SMB was open, but we were not able to get any kind of guest account connection or null session on that. So we're kind of stuck there. But yeah, without further ado, let's look into that web application that they had running. And like I mentioned in the last video, definitely check that one out if you haven't already seen it. But one thing that I mentioned is we're going to look for is we're going to want to pay particular attention to if we can find any valid user accounts on the domain. And the reason for that is it will allow us to look for a potential attack vector known as rep roasting. I'll explain that in a second. Let's just go to the site to start things off and see what they're running here. So it looks like it is a fictitious bank, banking website. Just scrolling through here, and let's see what kind of information they're providing here. So very generic, clients there. Let's scroll back up to the contact us. Sometimes, maybe that will have some kind of information on, potential user accounts and things like that. But everything here, from what we're seeing so far, seems to be very generic. About Us is definitely another potential page we could look at. And it looks like it is the same page that we're already viewing. But there are quite a bit of links on the site. Okay, here we go. Meet the team. So this gives us some potential people that work for this company that we can target. Now, the only thing we don't know is we don't know what the naming structure is. And that's something that we could potentially figure out. So let's just review any information about the domain that we had from before. So let me just minimize this. So if we look at our Etsy host file that we edited the last time through, egotisticalbank.local. So with that being said, we want to start putting together a list of potential usernames, and we're going to validate which ones are valid, essentially, right? And this is kind of the prerequisite step to doing rep roasting. Now, before we go any further, what is that, right? I need to explain that. I'm going to give you guys the more high level condensed version of it. If you really want to know the inner workings of it, which I do recommend, understand the theoretical sense as well. Go ahead and take a look at some of the articles out there on rep roasting. There's plenty of them if you search it up. But essentially, it has to do with the way Kerberos authentication works. So Kerberos is an authentication mechanism that Active Directory uses by default. And essentially, on all of the user accounts on the domain, by default, they are set up to require something known as pre-authentication. And essentially what that does is prevents any kind of brute forcing. It's a mitigator to that. And that would be the secure way to do it, right? But sometimes you can have accounts set up, configured to not require pre-authentication. And in particular, this is something that you would see more commonly with service accounts. So for example, an example of a service account would be a account that you use to connect to my MS SQL server, database, right? Or even some other service, right? Like your web server account, something like that, right? That's essentially what a service account is. By all intents and purposes, on a Windows system, it's pretty much the same as any other user account. It's just your intended use of that account is just to interact with whatever service, right? But sometimes, from one reason or another, the administrators find it easier to disable the pre-authentication. And in that case, we can conduct what is known as an as-rep-roast attack against the Active Directory environment. So if your account is set up to not require pre-authentication, essentially you can go to the DC and say, hey, I am this user, and it's not going to verify it, right? Because pre-authentication is disabled. And it's basically just going to give you a TGT, a valid encrypted, that's the key, encrypted ticket granting ticket. Now, this by itself is not even necessarily something you can exploit. However, if that account is using a password that is a weak password, then you can actually crack the encrypted TGT and get the credentials for that account, right? Get the password for that service account. And like I said, once you get your first valid set of credentials, that completely opens up your possibilities of what to do. So going back to methodology, right? I want to really make sure I'm driving home the methodology, letting you guys know what my methodology is on this. This is something I look for every single time when I'm up against a domain controller, because this is kind of low-hanging fruit, right? As you'll see, it's very quick to test for this. And on the upside, if you do find this, then congratulations, you have your first set of credentials. You're one step closer to rooting the box, right? So with that being said, our very next step is, since we have these what look to be team members, users of the domain, most likely, we're going to create a word list. So yeah, let's do exactly that. To make this a little bit easier, let me just set this up where I can see both things at the same time. And we'll draw that up. I mean, maybe the easier way to do it would be with Sublime Text or something. Whoops. Forgot that I didn't have an icon for burp, so that threw me off. But let's just, we won't need Burp Suite in this case. We can do it in Vim, no big deal. Let's see where we're at. We'll just go into some throwaway directory for right now. And let's call this users.txt. So we see a number of names here. We didn't find any information about how their naming convention works in their company. That is something that, if we wanted to, we could keep digging on further on the site to see if it discloses that anywhere. But let's go for the common ones, right? All right, so now we have all these. The next thing is, maybe, for example, maybe it's a different format, right? What if it is, what else could it be? It could be it could be F, f.smith, right? It could be first initial dot last name. That's another common scheme you could see. Another thing I could think of is another common convention would be first name underscore last name. So let's fill in all of those as well for completeness. And the last thing that I'm going to do is I am going to try the convention of first initial last name. And when it comes to this kind of stuff, you could literally just keep on trying as many permutations as you can think of, really, and maybe one of them works. Now, if this was a real-life engagement, chances are it would be a little bit easier, because there are websites out there that look for this information on companies that have an internet presence, which are pretty much all companies, right? And they'll actually tell you, you can actually search the company and find out what the convention is like for their accounts, if that information is available. So that would be the approach that I would use in the sense of like real world. So you all know that. So yeah, I think this list should be good. So I'm going to save this. And now what I'm going to do is there's a number of ways to do this, but my preferred way is I'm going to use a tool called KerbRoot. Just make sure I have that on here. I do. And KerbRoot can do a lot of things, but one of the things that's really nice, really interesting, is it has a functionality called user enum, and perhaps we can find more information on that, right? So it will enumerate valid usernames from a list by constructing AS requests. So that's actually what we need in order to AsRep roast. So that's really nice. Not only can we look up valid usernames, but we can also AsRep roast all in the same command, essentially. So it's really nice one to use for this. Another thing you can do is you can use crackmap exec for this as well, just so you guys know. But this is not installed on Kali by default, or it wasn't installed on Parrot by default either. It's a Golang tool, but yeah, it's just something you can grab with the simple go get command. And it should tell you the exact command you need to run on the GitHub page for that. So not very difficult to set up. But yeah, we use user enum, and we got to specify the IP address of the DC. So 10.10.10.175 is what we're going to go with. We also need to, looks like I used this before, right? We also want to specify the name of the domain, right? So in our case, egotisticalbank.local. And then from there, we'll tell it to use users.text. So let's run that. And okay, well, there you go. That was that was very fast. That was the correct naming convention. So they're using first initial, last name. So F Smith. So it found a valid username. Not only that, it found that this account does not have pre-auth required. So very quickly and easily, we were able to obtain the encrypted TGT. Now, if you probably noticed earlier, there was this tac downgrade that I had before. And the reason for that is this hash here is not supported in Hashcat. We need to downgrade it in order to get it into a format that Hashcat can crack. I think same thing with John as well if you use that tool. So let me just pull up Hashcat example hashes, and that could give us some more information on just what I'm talking about here. So, and you can also look at the example hashes through the tool itself, but I'm just going to opt to pull it up in the browser. And so, yeah, let me definitely make this larger for you guys. But what we can do, right, is we can look for AsRep. And if you notice here, it's going to be mode 18200, Kerberos 5, AsRep. And if you notice here, we need the $23. We have the $18. So we technically have a different version of this hash. It's not going to be compatible, in other words. But we can fix this issue very simply by just throwing in the tac downgrade here. So if we rerun this command with downgrade, we see that now it is $23, and therefore it is in the format that we need. So the way that I prefer to do this is I recommend to do your cracking on your host machine. It'll run a lot faster because it can harness the power of your graphics card, your GPU. If you do it in a VM, it's not going to be able to use that power. And especially if you have like me, you have a decent graphics card, it's definitely something you're going to want to do. So let me just grab that. So now that I have that open, the very first thing I'm going to do is in my Hashcat directory, I'm going to save it as hashes.txt. So I just created a file called hashes.txt. I don't believe it was there by default, just so you guys know. And I paste the hash in. Maybe I should word wrap this so you can see it a little easier. Just like that, pretty much exactly as it was output is how I'm going to put it in. Save it. And now I'm just going to open a command prompt here, a Windows terminal. And because I always run this from my Windows terminal, and it's pretty much all I run on my host system Windows terminal, I can just up arrow it, and it's already there for me. The only thing I need to modify was the mode. If you recall from the example hashes, it was mode 18200. So we're going to put that in. And what I like to do is supply the TAC-O flag to have it output to a file, just in case I need to reference it later. You know, you never know when you're going to forget to record your credentials in the heat of the moment, right? We'd like to think we'd always take notes, but Hopefully this doesn't mess up my recording at all, as it is using my GPU. But you see here, it cracked it. That's exactly what you're looking for. And to easily see it, just open up crack.txt. And this is the password. The strokes 23 is the password for the F Smith account. So now, congratulations, you have your first set of valid credentials via ASREP roasting. As you see here, very simple. Now, obviously, you look at a password like this, very insecure. This is also, from a defensive standpoint, why it's so important to use complex passwords, right? Also, something I didn't mention, if we go back to that command, I was running against the rocku.txt word list, right? Very common. So if you're not using a very complex password, you're using a common, even if it is complex, but it's a common password, something that might be in a word list like this or another one that an attacker might use, then that significantly weakens the security of your environment, right? So you want to make sure you're using those complex passwords. And, obviously from an attacker standpoint, we wouldn't be able to even get anything off of this if it, was using a, very complex password. Like, for example, the KRB TGT account, it is always ASREP roastable. However, the password is randomized, set by Windows, and very complex, so you're never going to crack it. So even though you can get the ticket like we have here for that account, for the KRB TGT account, nothing's really going to come of that. So this by itself is not a vulnerability, but this combined with a weak password is a vulnerability. And as you see here, it allowed us to obtain our first set of valid credentials. And you see just how simple this process is. As far as methodology, this is something that I'm always going to look for on every AD environment that I'm testing. Certainly on the OSCP, this is something I'm going to be looking for. So hopefully this really cleared up how to, start out in assessing an Active Directory environment. And now that we've gotten this, also you can see the power of just even getting usernames is very powerful in an Active Directory, up against an Active Directory environment. In the next video in the series, we're going to start looking at some of the options we have available now that we have our valid set of credentials, because like I was saying earlier, that really greatly expands what we could potentially start looking for in here. We have a lot more freedom to look around, and also where things can get a little bit more complicated, but there's some really good tools that you can use to make life a heck of a lot easier. They were not mentioned in the PWK, so I definitely need to do that justice, right? And we're also going to be making videos on how to do those client-side attacks as well, utilizing Responder and things like that, because that's absolutely essential. But yeah, hopefully this gave you a good introductory to the curb root tool. But if you stuck around to this point in the video, I would like to show you another way that you can do this using Impacket, right? Because like I said, there's a number of ways you can do this. You can do it with Rubus as well, especially if you got access to a Windows machine on the domain. That would be a good thing to do. But you can do like a Impacket get MP users and pass it the users file, right? Users.txt in my case. And then you want to give it the IP address of your domain controller. So 10.10.10.175. And then it needs the domain name. So I might have to go back and look. I think it might have been Sauna. It'll bark at me if I'm wrong, though. So yeah, we're getting this error, and this is good to see that, to troubleshoot it. I think it was the egotistical bank. So we'll just go back on that and slot this in here. And this is a command that is very touchy. Okay, yeah. There we go. We got it. We end up getting the F Smith one there. And the nice thing is this command gave us the ticket in the right format, as you see the $23. So that's another way that we could go about it there. And this was the command for all you guys at home. So yeah, as you see here, a number of different ways that we could go about doing this. But I definitely use this way quite a bit as well. So I wanted to make it known to you guys. This could be very helpful if you're, for whatever reason, having trouble with a certain tool. sometimes hacking can be weird, right? So good to know a number of ways to do things. So yeah, hopefully this video helped. I know it got a bit long here, but I really wanted to drive home these points here. Let me know if there's any questions down in the comment section below. And if you want to get into more technical content, I have that on the screen right now for you. I'll see you guys right over in those videos. Thanks for watching.